300 enemy fighters, armed, determined, and closing in, represented their commander's last sliver of hope and the final looming threat to a city already bracing for the worst. The night before, intercepted intel had painted a bleak picture. A hostile column moving with purpose, their objective crystal clear, their numbers overwhelming. By all accounts, dawn would bring disaster. Yet, as the sun peeked over the horizon, the city's defenders were met with an unsettling silence. No gunfire shattered the morning. No plumes of smoke billowed in the distance. No enemy banners marred the horizon. The threat had simply disappeared. Inside the war rooms, analysts hunched over satellite feeds and listened intently to intercepted radio chatter, desperately seeking any trace of the force that had seemed unstoppable just hours before. There were no bodies to count, no prisoners to interrogate, no reports of a retreat. It was as if the earth itself had opened up and swallowed them whole. For the civilians who had spent a sleepless night gripped by fear, the morning brought a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Streets that should have been echoing with the sounds of battle were eerily calm. Against all odds, the city remained standing. Rumors quickly began to circulate. Some whispered of a secret weapon, others dared to suggest a miracle. But those who truly understood the nature of shadows knew better. Somewhere out there, a small group of men had been given a single impossible order: don't let them reach the city. What followed would become legend, a story whispered in hushed tones by those who understood the true cost of unseen wars. How did a small team manage to erase an entire army? What tactics, what courage, what sacrifice did it take to make 300 fighters vanish without a trace? To truly understand how this happened, we must go back to the moment the warning first arrived. The city was more than just bricks and mortar. It was the region's keystone, a crucial hub where supply routes met and alliances were put to the test. For months, its inhabitants had been living under the cloud of war, watching the distant flashes of artillery inch ever closer. Losing this city wouldn't just be a minor tactical loss. It would shatter the front lines, cut off communication, and leave the heartland wide open for the enemy. Every commander on both sides knew its significance. Whoever held the city would control the entire campaign's rhythm. The enemy force bearing down on them was no undisciplined rabble. Forged in the fires of years of fighting, they moved with a cold, calculated purpose, their reputation earned through merciless offensives that left nothing to fate. 300 strong, they were the elite chosen for this mission. Hardened veterans, zealous fighters, and mercenaries, all driven by one goal: take the city, crush its defenders, and deliver the message that resistance was pointless. Their commanders had promised a swift victory, and their scouts reported that little stood in their way. Inside the city, tension was a palpable thing. Civilians hastily packed their belongings, ready to run at a moment's notice. Local defense units, outgunned and weary, manned the barricades with a grim resolve. City leaders desperately requested reinforcements, but the broader war had spread Allied forces too thin. Every available unit was already engaged elsewhere, fighting their own desperate battles. The city's destiny seemed all but decided. Then came the alert. Intelligence officers had intercepted enemy communications, confirming the attack would begin within hours. The enemy's path was plotted, their numbers verified. There was no time to evacuate, no chance of rescue. The defenders steeled themselves for the inevitable fall, knowing that if the city was lost, the enemy wouldn't stop there. A sense of impending doom hung heavy in the air, a crushing weight on everyone within the city walls. With standard military forces spread to their breaking point, only one possibility remained. When the call came, it wasn't for a whole army, but for a small group of men whose names wouldn't make the news. The Special Air Service, SAS, had made a name for themselves in the shadows, through missions where failing wasn't an option and no one expected any thanks. These operators, who came from all over Britain, were all driven by the same thing. Just getting selected had broken many, but the ones who made it were those who did well under pressure, who could think and fight when things got crazy. Their training was something else. Weeks of pushing themselves to the limit, finding their way, and surviving, followed by months of getting really good with weapons and explosives, and learning how to move without being seen. They were experts in messing things up, finding out information, and fighting in ways that weren't normal. But more than just being skilled, it was how they thought that made them different. They refused to give up, and they had a quiet confidence because they knew they could do things that others couldn't. They were the last people you called when everything else had gone wrong. But even some of those on their side had doubts. The enemy had way more people. The city's defenders wondered how a small team, no matter how good, could possibly win against 300 determined fighters. Some thought the SAS was a long shot, maybe a legendary force, but not a miracle. The operators themselves knew what they were up against. They knew the dangers and that they might not make it back. But they also knew what was on the line. If they failed, the city would fall, and so would the hope of the whole area. But even for the SAS, this mission would push them to their absolute limits. In a dimly lit operations room, the SAS team huddled around a well-worn map, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on everyone present. Intelligence officers pointed out the enemy's projected path, 300 fighters advancing in uneven columns, using the cloak of night and unforgiving landscape to conceal their movements. Satellite imagery verified their strength, but offered little additional insight. The enemy was disciplined, well-equipped, and moving with alarming speed. There would be no room for error. The orders were straightforward but maddeningly restrictive. Stop the enemy from reaching the city, but avoid direct confrontation at all costs. The SAS couldn't afford a full-scale battle. Their numbers were too small, and the enemy would overrun them in open combat. Instead, they would have to depend on guile, sabotage, and precision attacks. Strike decisively, disappear without a trace, and create chaos. Every action had to be executed flawlessly. Any misstep could spell catastrophe, not only for the team, but for the thousands of civilians sheltering behind the city's walls. The rules of engagement were firm. Civilian casualties were unacceptable. The SAS would have to move with barely a whisper, leaving no room for mistakes. Communication would be sparse and extraction was far from assured. The team's commander, a seasoned veteran of numerous operations, fully grasped the significance of what was at stake. Failure meant the city would fall, and the enemy would secure a strategic advantage that could alter the course of the entire war. Time itself had become the enemy. The opposing force was less than 12 hours away from the city's perimeter. Each wasted moment diminished the opportunity to make a move. The responsibility of command was immense, but the operators shouldered it without faltering. They understood what was expected of them. They understood what hung in the balance. With the seconds slipping away, the SAS began their advance into the uncertainties that lay ahead. Night descended, heavy and complete, as the SAS team slipped from their entry point, the world shrinking to shadows and the soft crunch of boots on the rough ground. The terrain offered no favors, jagged peaks, dense thickets, and ravines that twisted like scars across the landscape. Cold sheets of rain drifted in, concealing their advance but turning each step into a calculated risk. Somewhere ahead, enemy patrols swept the area, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, searching for any sign of intrusion. The team moved as a single unit, each member a master of silence and control. Every piece of equipment was stripped down to the bare necessities, no extra weight, no unnecessary sound. They advanced in staggered formation, using the terrain to their advantage, pausing at each rise to scan for movement. The enemy was close, too close. The SAS could sometimes hear muffled voices, the clatter of weapons, the faint cough of an engine. Every sense was heightened, bordering on panic, but their training kicked in. They became invisible, blending into the night, ghosts in a battlefield claimed by the enemy. Deception was their defense. The team laid false trails, scattering spent shell casings from a different weapon and leaving misleading footprints to lure enemy scouts away from their actual path. At one point, they tapped into a patrol's radio frequency, broadcasting static and false reports to create confusion. Improvisation was constant. Routes changed instantly, signals adapted, plans rewritten in the dark. Every decision was a gamble, every movement a test of nerve. Then, the moment that nearly unraveled everything. As the team crept along a narrow ravine, a flare suddenly exploded overhead, bathing the ground in harsh white light. For a split second, time stood still. An enemy patrol less than 20 meters away snapped to attention, weapons raised. The SAS flattened themselves against the earth, holding their breath, hearts pounding. One member, exposed on a rocky outcrop, was caught in a searching beam. Time stretched on, the silence broken only by the hiss of rain and the distant crackle of enemy radios. But discipline won out. The member remained perfectly still, relying on shadow and stillness. The patrol, misled by the false trails and the earlier confusion, moved on, their attention drawn away by a staged noise further down the ravine. The team exhaled in unison, the danger passing as quickly as it had appeared. It was a stark reminder. One wrong step, one moment of hesitation, and the mission would end before it even began. The SAS pressed on, deeper into enemy territory, every sense heightened by the close call. Their infiltration was a masterclass in patience, nerve, and tactical skill. A silent war fought in inches and seconds, where the margin for error was measured in heartbeats. But getting in was just the beginning. The real test was about to start. The enemy column moved forward, confident in their mission. Headlights were dimmed, engines emitted a low rumble, and their formation snaked its way through the valley. They were sure that the night belonged to them, and the city ahead would fall before the sun came up. But the SAS had specific reasons for choosing this location. They had mapped out and memorized every contour, every choke point, every bit of cover. The team broke into pairs, each assigned to a sector, their positions undetectable by prying eyes. Claymore mines were placed at natural bottlenecks. Tripwires were hidden beneath loose stones, and demolition charges were attached to the lead and rear vehicles, all designed to trap the entire force. Timing was critical. The operators waited, their nerves on edge, as the first enemy scouts passed within mere meters of their hiding spots. The rain picked up, concealing the faint click of detonators and the soft murmur of encrypted radios. Above, a drone sent down thermal images, confirming the enemy's numbers and movements. The SAS commander watched the feed, waiting for just the right moment when the majority of the enemy force was cornered. Every second felt like an eternity. Then, with a single coded word, the valley exploded. The lead and rear vehicles were torn apart by explosions, trapping the column in a fiery corridor. Claymores decimated the first wave of fighters, while silenced rifles took down those who tried to mount a counterattack. The enemy, trapped in a nightmare of confusion and terror, fired blindly into the darkness, unable to see their attackers or understand the scope of the attack. The SAS took advantage of the chaos by shifting positions and attacking from different angles, creating the impression of a much larger force. Psychological warfare became their most effective weapon. Loudspeakers hidden among the rocks broadcast distorted enemy commands, causing panic and distrust. Flares shot into the sky, casting eerie shadows and making every bush appear to be alive with movement. The enemy's radios crackled with fake orders, convincing some units to retreat and others to move straight into prepared kill zones. The SAS turned the enemy's discipline against them, breaking down their cohesion. But the plan almost fell apart. In the middle of the ambush, a group of enemy fighters, more experienced than the others, managed to outflank one of the SAS positions. A short, intense firefight broke out in the dark, with muzzle flashes and shouts echoing off the valley walls. One operator was trapped, his escape route blocked. For a moment, it seemed like the enemy might break through, ruining the entire operation. But another SAS pair, moving quickly and quietly, flanked the attackers, neutralizing the threat with controlled bursts. The trapped operator returned to his team, shaken but alive. Success and disaster were separated by a hair's breadth. As the battle raged, the SAS requested limited air support. A single drone strike on a group of enemy vehicles, timed to coincide with a feigned attack. The explosion sent shockwaves through the enemy's ranks, leading many to believe they were facing a much larger force. Some fighters surrendered, while others escaped into the darkness, leaving behind weapons and equipment. The valley became a confusing maze filled with fear and broken morale. Within an hour, the enemy force was no longer a fighting unit. Some were captured, others disappeared into the night, but most were simply gone, lost in the chaos created by the SAS. The city was safe for the time being. The ambush was over, but its impact would be felt far beyond the valley. As the dust settled, the SAS began to understand the true cost of their success. Long after the echoes of gunfire faded and silence reclaimed the valley, the repercussions of that fateful night continued to shape the war's trajectory. The vanishing of 300 enemy fighters morphed into a whispered legend, shared in hushed tones in war rooms and echoed on city streets, a story walking the razor's edge between fact and fiction. For the enemy, the vanishing wasn't just a tactical setback. It was a crushing psychological blow, shattering their carefully constructed image of invincibility. Commanders, once striding forward with unwavering confidence, now hesitated, eyes darting nervously at the shadows that seemed to hold unseen threats. Patrols shrank, movements became more deliberate, and the relentless momentum that had fueled their campaign began to sputter and die. For the city, the operation marked a critical turning point. Survivors recounted the night with a mixture of breathless awe and utter disbelief. Some hailed it as a divine miracle, others whispered of ghostly intervention. The truth, of course, was far more intricate and profoundly human. Historians would later pinpoint this mission as the pivotal moment when the war's tide began to recede, not because of overwhelming brute force, but because of the pinpoint precision, unwavering discipline, and audacious courage displayed by a mere handful of individuals. The city's weary defenders, who had braced themselves for inevitable defeat, discovered a newfound wellspring of resolve. Civilians already packing their bags for exile chose instead to rebuild their shattered lives, their faith in survival rekindled by an act they couldn't fully grasp. Within the SAS, the mission became a textbook example of achieving the seemingly impossible. Debriefings were exhaustive, every single decision scrutinized, every calculated risk meticulously weighed against the eventual outcome. The hard-won lessons concerning the art of deception, the power of psychological warfare, and the excruciating limits of human endurance were meticulously integrated into doctrine, shaping the rigorous training of future generations of soldiers. Veterans who had emerged alive from that valley spoke in hushed voices of the immense burden they carried, the friends they had mournfully left behind, and the stark realization that their actions had irrevocably altered the course of a brutal war. For them, the true legend wasn't found in the cold, hard numbers, but in the fleeting moments of crippling doubt, the sharp flashes of primal fear, and the unbreakable resolve to push onward when all hope appeared to be lost. And yet the myth persisted, growing with each retelling in the years that followed. Some claimed the SAS had deployed cutting-edge secret technology, while others spun fantastical tales of a pact forged with fate itself. The reality, however, was both far simpler and infinitely more profound. A small band of men, armed with exceptional skill, unwavering courage, and an unyielding willingness to risk everything, had stared into the face of impossible odds and emerged victorious. Their victory was neither clean nor easily won. It was bought and paid for with rivers of sweat, spilled blood, and unspoken sacrifice. Historians and grizzled veterans alike would endlessly debate the intricate details, but they all stood united on one undeniable point. The mission's far-reaching impact resonated far beyond the immediate confines of the battlefield. It irrevocably changed how enemies meticulously planned their campaigns, how allies dared to cling to hope, and how the world at large perceived the immense power wielded by elite forces operating in the shadowy world of covert operations. For those who called the city home, the memory of that single terrifying night became an enduring touchstone, a constant reminder that, sometimes, survival hinges not on overwhelming numbers, but on the unwavering courage of a select few. Ultimately, the world may never fully uncover every last detail, but the city still stands tall, a defiant symbol of resilience, and the legend endures, whispered on the wind. Ultimately, the story of the army that disappeared is more than just a display of clever tactics or battlefield strategy. It's a tribute to the individuals who work unseen, whose successes aren't splashed across newspapers, but are instead reflected in the lives saved and the cities that remain standing. Secrecy is at the heart of what they do. Undertakings that will never be publicly praised, sacrifices that will never be fully appreciated. For every operation that shifts the direction of a conflict, there are countless instances of fear, uncertainty, and grief, carried silently in the dark. The operatives who stood their ground that night weren't looking for accolades. Their bravery wasn't showy or loud, but consistent and resolute, a subtle form of heroism that lasts long after the sounds of fighting have died down. They shouldered the burden of impossible decisions, the memories of fallen friends, and the awareness that their actions would forever remain hidden. Yet they kept going, motivated by a sense of duty, by their loyalty to one another, and by the conviction that certain things are worth protecting, even when no one is paying attention. As the city was rebuilt and its people resumed their lives, the real price of victory remained in the hearts of those who had fought for it. The world may never learn who they are, but their impact lives on in every life that was rescued, every spark of hope that was reignited. Sometimes, the most significant battles are the ones that go unnoticed.